Michael Evans was an example of success. The CEO of one of New York's most promising companies. He was racking up awards and was always surrounded by a team of executives ready to make his ideas thrive. But despite everything he had achieved, he felt an emptiness. It was a nagging feeling that wouldn't go away, even with his greatest achievements. One evening, after a company event, he arrived at his apartment, one of those luxury ones with a spectacular view of the city. As soon as he closed the door and the silence took over, the emptiness seemed even more intense. He put his cell phone on the table and threw himself on the sofa, his eyes focused on the ceiling, but unable to see anything around him. The truth was that Michael couldn't shake the constant feeling that something was missing. It was as if there was a hole inside him that neither the luxury apartment, nor the luxury cars, nor the success could fill. He felt he had no one to share his victories with, no one to share his sincere smiles of joy with. Although he had a life full of material achievements, he didn't feel truly fulfilled. He remembered moments from his childhood appearing in his mind in quick flashes, each one bringing a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. "Why does this still affect me so much?" he muttered to himself, not expecting an answer. Pulling out his cell phone, he opened an old photo album that he had scanned years ago. There were images from his childhood, but each one looked more like a piece of an unfinished puzzle. Looking at the photos, his parents' faces seemed so distant and formal. In the pictures, they were always serious or busy, without a single shot of them hugging or smiling sincerely. There was only one presence that gave him a little comfort and genuine affection: Juliana, the nanny who had brought him up and who was in almost every happy memory he had of that time. In one corner of the photo, there he was about 5 years old holding her hand. He remembered that day when Juliana took him to the park because her parents were busy on a business trip. "You promised me you'd take care of me forever, remember, Juliana?" he whispered to the picture, as if she could hear. A sad smile took over his face, and he moved on to the next photo. In it, Juliana was holding him as he tried to ride his bike for the first time. The memory was clear. Juliana was encouraging him with a patience he couldn't find in anyone else. "That's right, Michael. You can do it. I'm right here," her voice echoed in his mind, bringing a rare and brief moment of warmth to his chest. He could almost feel her hands holding him up, making sure he didn't fall. She was the one who was there to calm him down when he woke up frightened in the middle of the night. She was the one who listened to him patiently at the time he asked why his parents never stayed at home. "Juliana, why are Daddy and Mommy always busy?" he had once asked, with the innocence of a child who just wanted his parents to be there. She sighed and, with a gentle look, replied, "They have a lot of work, Michael. But that doesn't mean they don't love you." "But do you love me, Juliana?" He remembered the childish anguish that came through in the question, a question that shouldn't be asked by someone so young. And he remembered her answer, so honest and direct. "With all my heart, my darling." Juliana's voice continued to echo in his mind, stronger than any other memory. She had been his constant figure, his security, the warmth in the midst of a family that was always so cold and distant. And yet, she was also the first to leave a void, leaving when he needed her most. He was only 8 years old when Juliana had to leave to look after her own family, leaving him alone once again. Michael sighed deeply, pressing his cell phone against his chest. He knew he should be grateful for everything he had, but this loneliness seemed to erode the value of every achievement. Deep down, he wondered if he could ever truly fill the void that seemed to have been born the day Juliana crossed his threshold for the last time. He finally got up from the sofa and walked over to the huge glass window that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking view of the illuminated city. But nothing about the landscape really touched him. It was just a beautiful scene that filled the space outside, while the inside remained dark and unanswered. All this success, and for what? He whispered to himself. For whom? He was tired of empty talk and meaningless applause. The success that everyone admired was just a facade, a symbol of a successful life that, in reality, seemed to be silently falling apart. He wiped his hand across his face and took one last look at the photo album on his cell phone. A thought occurred to him. Perhaps it was time to confront this emptiness, to look for the answers he had always avoided. As he switched off the lights in the apartment, Michael was taken by an unexpected decision. He knew what he needed to do. He wasn't sure if he would find what he was looking for, but something told him that in order to move forward, he would need to revisit the past. Michael remembered the day he met Juliana for the first time. He was only 3 years old, and his parents, as usual, were away on a business trip. That day, when he returned from nursery, he noticed that someone different was waiting for him at the door. "Hi, Michael. My name is Juliana," she said with a soft smile and a kind look that he would never forget. He didn't know how to answer, but just held his small backpack tightly, watching the simple-looking woman with a welcoming gaze. She bent down to his height and held out her hand. "Come on, darling. I'll take care of you, okay?" Michael hesitantly took her hand and felt an unexpected comfort. From that moment on, Juliana became the only constant presence in his life. She was there for him in big and small moments, filling in the gaps left by his parents. As he grew up, Juliana became more than just a caregiver. She was his friend, his confidant, the mother figure who helped him understand the world around him. When he asked questions that no one seemed to have time to answer, Juliana was always there, ready to listen. Once, during a rainy afternoon, while he was drawing next to her, he stopped and stared at the window, where the rain was pouring down in little rivers on the glass. "Juliana, want Mom and Dad ever stay here with us?" He asked the question with a curious and innocent look on his face, waiting for an answer that perhaps even she didn't know how to give. She took a deep breath and gave a slight smile, trying her best to look calm. "Your father and mother work very hard, dear. They want you to have everything good, so they do what they think is best for you." But Michael shook his head, dissatisfied. "But I just wanted them to stay here." "You stay. Why can't they?" Juliana bent down to him, holding his small hand. "You know, my love, sometimes people think that doing a lot is the same as loving. And love, well, it expresses itself in many ways. But you're right to miss them. It's normal to feel that way. Do you love me, Juliana?" he asked, with a glint of hope in his eyes. She hugged him tightly. "With all my heart, Michael. I love you, as if you were my own son." That statement remained engraved in Michael's mind for the rest of his life. Her words, the sincerity in her voice, and the affection she conveyed were like a refuge for him. At that moment, Juliana had not only made up for her parents' absence, she had also become the emotional pillar he so desperately needed. In the years that followed, every gesture she made strengthened the bond between the two of them. Michael clung to every word of encouragement, every smile, every warm embrace. When he had nightmares, it was Juliana who ran to calm him down. "Juliana," he would shout, waking up startled, his heart racing. She came quickly, sitting next to him on the bed and running her hand through his hair. "So it's all right. I'm here, my love. The nightmares can't hurt you. You're safe. Do you promise you'll always be with me?" he asked, holding her hand tightly. "I promise, darling. Whenever you need me, I'll be here." Juliana calmed him with infinite patience, and Michael felt that, with her around, no fear was too great, no sadness insurmountable. On quieter days, she taught him simple and important things, like the importance of being kind, of listening to others, of understanding that love was something precious. "We don't need many things, Michael. You just need to know how to take good care of the people around you," she would say as she prepared lunch, always including him in small tasks so that he felt part of it. "One day you'll grow up to do amazing things, Michael. Just remember never to let your heart harden," she would repeat, with a serious expression that he didn't fully understand at the time, but somehow knew was important. Every day with Juliana was like a life lesson, a lesson he kept without realizing it. And every time he thought of her, even years later, he understood that his nanny was much more than a caregiver. Juliana was a source of love, an anchor, the heart that beat silently beside him as he grew up in an environment empty of emotions. The moments they spent together were simple but precious. He remembered when she would take him to the park and they would spend the afternoon playing on the swing. Michael would always let out a pure laugh, as if the world were simple and safe, and Juliana would happily watch him enjoy his childhood as he deserved. One of these afternoons, as the two of them sat on the grass, the gentle wind playing on their faces, Michael turned to her with a seriousness unexpected for a child. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" Juliana was surprised by the question, but then smiled and shook her head. "As long as I can, I'll be here. And even if one day I have to leave, you'll always be in my heart, Michael. Love never disappears." He nodded, as if those words had a special weight, something he would treasure forever. She hadn't lied to him or promised him something impossible, but she had given him the security she had always cherished. The connection Michael had with Juliana was deeper than he could understand at the time, but even as a child, he knew that genuine and sincere love was rare. And although her presence helped him cope with the absence of his parents, he still carried an anguish that, without knowing it, would stay with him for the rest of his life. The years passed, and Juliana remained the most stable and loving figure he had ever known. And despite all the success he would one day achieve, she would be the person who would most influence the man he would become. 8 years old was the turning point in Michael's life. It was a winter morning, and as usual, his parents were away on another business trip. He woke up excited, hoping to spend the day with Juliana. She had promised that they would bake cookies together, something he always loved to do with her. However, something strange was in the air that day. Juliana was different, her countenance serious, without her usual warm smile. As she prepared breakfast for Michael, she looked at him with a mixture of sadness and apprehension. "Juliana, is everything all right?" he asked, not understanding why her smile was so distant. She hesitated for a moment, then bent down to meet him. "Michael, I need to talk to you. I know it's going to be hard to understand right now, but I want you to know that I'll be there for you." Michael felt a chill in his stomach, not knowing what to expect, but he held her hand, seeking support. "What's wrong? What happened?" Juliana sighed, trying to find the words. "Your parents, they had an accident, Michael. A very serious accident." Michael blinked, not knowing exactly what that meant. "They're going to be fine, aren't they?" The expression on Juliana's face changed, and tears began to form in her eyes. "Unfortunately, darling, they're not coming back." Michael's world stopped at that moment. He couldn't fully understand it, but he felt an enormous tightness in his chest, a pain that seemed too big to fit into his little child's heart. He felt tears welling up, and without thinking, he hugged Juliana tightly. "What am I going to do now?" he asked between sobs, clinging to her as if his life depended on it. Juliana hugged him even tighter as her own tears streamed down her face. "You have me, Michael. I'll take care of you. I'll be here, by your side, whenever you need me." They stayed like that, hugging in the middle of the kitchen, while the smell of cookies baking filled the room. But now it seemed empty and lifeless. The news of the loss of his parents, however distant they were, was overwhelming. Their presence, however cold and absent, was still an anchor in Michael's heart. And now that anchor had been torn away. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The house was full of people, lawyers, acquaintances of his parents, figures he barely knew and who seemed to be mere shadows passing through his life without actually seeing him. Juliana remained by his side, the only source of stability and comfort. She took care of him in every detail, trying her best to fill the void that was opening up more and more. One evening, as they settled down in the living room after a long day of formalities and goodbyes, Michael looked at Juliana with eyes full of uncertainty. "What now, Juliana? Where are we going?" She held his hand affectionately and ran her hand through his hair, searching for the right words. "For now, we'll stay here. I'll take care of everything. There's no need to worry, my love. You're safe with me." He nodded, but his lost look showed the pain he still couldn't fully express. Juliana hugged him again, trying to give him the security he so desperately needed, but which, deep down, she knew would not be enough to erase the emptiness left by the loss of her parents. A few days later, new news fell on them. Juliana, looking sad and resigned, told Michael that she had to leave. "My family in the Northeast is going through difficulties, Michael. My brothers need me. I have no choice." Michael felt the ground disappear once again. "But you promised you'd stay with me. You promised." Juliana held his face between her hands, her eyes full of pain. "I know, darling, and it's the last thing I wanted to do. But my family needs me too. I need to take care of them like I took care of you." He shook his head in despair, trying to process the idea of losing the only person he had left. "You can't leave me, Juliana. I don't know what to do without you." She hugged him once more, and Michael felt her tears wet his hair. "I promise that, even if you're far away, you'll always be in my heart. I'll always be thinking of you, and one day I hope I can come back." These were the words that stuck in Michael's mind when Juliana finally said goodbye. At that moment, he felt more alone than ever. The only person who understood him, who gave him love and security, was now leaving too. As he watched Juliana walk away through the front door, Michael felt as if he were being torn away from himself. The emptiness that was once bearable with her presence now became an abyss. He stood still, staring at the closed door, unable to understand why life was taking away everything you loved. In the days that followed, Michael wandered around the house like a shadow, his eyes tired and lost. The corridors and bedrooms, once filled with Juliana's laughter and comforting presence, were now just cold spaces, echoing the absence of her and her parents. The only concrete memory he had was Juliana's promise that, somehow, she would always be there for him, even if she was far away. But for a child, this promise sounded like a hope that was almost impossible to understand. And even if he tried, he knew that the pain and longing for her and his parents would be his companions for a long time. Michael then found his own way of carrying on. He grew up surrounded by tutors, servants, and the material comforts left by his parents. But he never filled the void that Juliana and her parents left behind. It was a constant feeling that only grew with the years, a silent pain that shaped him deeply and permanently. And so Juliana's farewell wasn't just a momentary loss. It was the beginning of a long road of solitude, where Michael learned, at a very young age, the price of absence and the fragility of affection. Her promise echoed in his heart like a whisper, a reminder that, despite the pain, he carried within him a small flame of genuine love, even in the midst of the darkness that seemed to grow every day. Time passed, and Michael felt the loneliness that now seemed a constant in his life. The house, once full of memories, was increasingly empty, as if every corner echoed the goodbyes he never wanted to face. The tutors and servants did their jobs, but none of them were able to fill the void that Juliana had left. Michael continued to grow up with an impeccable education, a strict routine, but without the care and affection he had once known. One afternoon, while leafing through an old photo album, he found a picture of himself next to Juliana, both of them smiling carefree. It was a simple photo taken in the park with him sitting on the swing and her holding the chains to make sure he didn't fall off. Michael ran his fingers over her face in the photo, feeling a mixture of longing and gratitude. "I should never have let you go," he murmured to the image, feeling his heart squeeze. During his teenage years, that feeling of abandonment began to transform into something deeper and more complex. He had become independent and confident, but at the same time, there was an invisible barrier between him and the world. He remembered the words Juliana always said, "Don't let your heart harden, Michael." But for him, it seemed almost impossible not to create a shield against further pain and disappointment. The years went by, and Michael turned all that pain into motivation. He dedicated himself to his studies and, later, his career, with a determination that caught the attention of everyone around him. It was as if he was constantly proving something to himself and to the world. No one knew what he carried inside, or how much those feelings shaped his choices. One evening, after another day at work, Michael was alone in his office, watching the city through the glass windows. The lights of New York shone brightly, but the view didn't comfort him. He picked up his cell phone and impulsively typed in Juliana's name. He tried to search for any clue as to where she might be, but found nothing. He sighed in frustration and whispered to himself, "Where are you, Juliana? Will I ever get to see you again?" Even without answers, Michael carried on with his life, always remembering her in every small gesture of affection he offered to the few friends and employees he gained. Despite his reserved manner, Michael treated everyone with respect and consideration. It was a way of honoring what Juliana had taught him, the importance of caring for the people around him. Success began to be part of Michael's life, But in his mind, what mattered wasn't just prestige or money. He wanted his life to have a purpose, something that went beyond material achievements. In every decision, he tried to apply what he had learned from Juliana about the importance of being truthful and not allowing pride to take over his heart. One day, after a business meeting, a colleague stopped him and commented, "You're different, Michael. I always thought executives like you were cold, calculating, but you really seem to care." Michael smiled slightly and replied, "Life has taught me that without people, what do we really have left? It doesn't matter how high we climb if we can't take anyone with us." His colleague nodded, impressed by the answer. For Michael, however, those words were more than a philosophy. They were a daily reminder of his promise to Juliana. He knew that, somehow, he was keeping what she had taught him alive, even if she was no longer by his side. As he grew older, Michael never forgot the moments he had spent with Juliana. In his mind, he could still hear her voice, her warm laughter, the way she cared for him. That was his greatest source of strength, even in the midst of the loneliness he carried deep down. "You promised you would always be with me," he would mutter to himself in the most difficult moments, like an amulet that kept him from giving up. Juliana's absence was a wound that would never heal, but at the same time, she was present in every act of kindness he performed. She had taught him that love was more than just physical presence. It was the impact we leave on the hearts of others. And as much as he missed her, he knew that Juliana's essence, the love she had planted in him, continued to guide him. The years passed, and Michael became increasingly well known in the business world. He was a brilliant executive, admired and respected, but behind his firm posture and remarkable success, there was a sense of dissatisfaction and emptiness that accompanied his every step. The loneliness he had felt since childhood remained his companion, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. One evening, after a long day of meetings and appointments, Michael was sitting alone in his luxurious office. He watched the lights of New York through the window, the skyscrapers illuminated, each building reflecting what he had achieved. But for him, that view was just a distant, lifeless backdrop. He sighed deeply, feeling a pang of anguish grow in his chest. Picking up an old photo of Juliana that he kept in his wallet, Michael stared at her, lost in thought. It was as if that smile of hers, frozen in time, brought back all the memories he was struggling to keep alive. He felt that somewhere in the world, she was still there, living a simple life, perhaps remembering him as a boy she had once looked after. "Juliana, where are you?" he murmured to the photo, almost like a silent prayer. Try as he might, the longing was immense, and Michael felt he had to do something. For years he'd had this idea, this desire to meet her again, but he'd always put it off, busy with his career, with the responsibilities he'd imposed on himself. However, at that moment, he realized that none of this had any real meaning if he continued to live with a heart full of doubts and longing. The next day, without much thought, Michael began to search for information. He contacted people, looked through old records, and did his best to find any clue that might lead him to Juliana. The search was more complicated than he imagined, but he didn't give up. It was as if every day brought him closer to an important piece of himself. After a few weeks of research and questions, he finally had some concrete information. Juliana was living in a small town in the northeast of the United States. Michael felt a wave of emotions run through his body. Anxiety, joy, nervousness, all mixed together. He knew he had to go there, even if he didn't know what was waiting for her. He needed to see her. He needed to tell her how much she meant to him, how much she had shaped who he had become. He prepared everything quickly and, the next day, took a flight to the Northeast. During the journey, he remembered the moments with her, the conversations, the lessons she had taught him when he was still a lonely and confused child. When he landed in the small town, he felt his heart racing. He took a deep breath and set off with determination. After a short drive to Juliana's house, Michael stopped in front of a simple, modest house, unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a small, humble-looking house, and he noticed signs of wear and tear on the walls and the backyard fence. The contrast between that house and the luxury he had built up over the course of his life was obvious. He hesitated for a moment, reflecting on all that this woman had sacrificed to take care of him. Then, with his heart racing, he knocked on the door. After a few moments, the door slowly opened, and there stood Juliana. She looked older, with the wrinkles that time had left, but her smile, that warm smile he knew so well, was exactly as he remembered it. Juliana stared at him for a moment, surprised, and then smiled, bringing her hands to her mouth. "Michael, is that you?" He felt tears gathering in his eyes and nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, Juliana, it's me. I came back to see you." Juliana stepped forward and, in an impulsive gesture, hugged him tightly. "My boy, you back." They stayed like that, hugging, for a long moment. Michael felt the weight of the years of distance dissolve in that instant, as if the pain of loss and time were fading away. When he released the embrace, Juliana looked at him tenderly. "I always hoped that someday you would show up," she said, her voice breaking. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of so many questions. "Juliana, I needed to see you. I needed to thank you for everything you've done for me, for being my family when I had no one." She smiled with a twinkle in her eyes. "You don't have to thank me, Michael. I love you like a son. I never did anything expecting anything in return." He looked around, noticing the simplicity of the surroundings. Juliana, who had dedicated her life to looking after him and then her own family, was now living modestly, facing difficulties he could barely imagine. "Juliana, I can do something for you now. I can help you to have a better, more comfortable life. Please let me do that." She looked at him for a moment, thoughtful, and finally nodded slightly. "I appreciate that, Michael. But the truth is that I've always had everything I needed, and you, my darling, have always been my greatest joy." Her words touched Michael's heart deeply. There, in front of the woman who had done so much for him, he realized that, more than material goods, she had taught him the true essence of love and gratitude. In that instant, he knew that his reunion with Juliana had filled a void that he had carried all his life. She looked at him again, as she did when he was a child, and touched his face, smiling. "Now go, my boy. Live your life with love, and always remember, what matters is not what we have, but who we are." Michael nodded, his eyes watering. He knew that this would be a lesson for life. And so, even in silence, he said goodbye to Juliana with the certainty that what she had planted in his heart would live on forever. After meeting Juliana again and spending that precious time by her side, Michael returned to New York with a new clarity in his heart. He had finally said goodbye to a painful chapter in his life and, at the same time, recovered the love and gratitude that Juliana had planted in him. Deep down, however, something still bothered him. Juliana's revelation about her parents' accident still echoed in his mind. Her words came back like lightning on a dark night. "Michael, it wasn't just an accident. There was a conspiracy." That phrase repeated itself in his head, creating a feeling he couldn't ignore. Something in his life, in his whole story, seemed incomplete. He felt he owed it to his parents and to himself to find out the truth. He determined to investigate. Returning to the office, he put together a team he could trust and started looking for answers. The investigation was delicate, and he knew it would touch on sensitive subjects, but he was prepared for anything that came up. "I'll see this through to the end," he thought with unshakable conviction. With every step he took, new questions arose. He discovered old documents, suspicious business conversations, unusual financial transactions. One afternoon, while going through his father's archives, he found a letter carefully tucked away between the pages of an old diary. In the letter, his father mentioned suspicions about a possible betrayal within the company, a plan that could put his family at risk. Michael read the passage, feeling a mixture of shock and anger. "So it's true," he muttered to himself. His heart raced, and he realized that he was getting closer to uncovering what had really happened. In a meeting with his lawyer, he presented the evidence he had gathered and explained his intention. The lawyer watched him in silence and, after a pause, commented, "Michael, you know that this could have big consequences. If there really was a conspiracy, the people involved could still be in positions of power today." Michael nodded, looking determined. I'm prepared for that. These people took my parents away from me and destroyed my family. I can't move on knowing that I never did anything. The days that followed were intense. Without realizing it, Michael spent late nights and early mornings immersed in the search for the truth, finding connections between directors of the time, business partners, and former employees of the company. With each new detail uncovered, he felt as if he were unearthing secrets that the world had tried to hide. One evening, while reviewing an unusual financial report, his phone rang. It was Sarah, a close friend, who had noticed his withdrawal and was worried. "Michael, are you okay? I feel like you've been so distant lately," she commented, with a worried tone in her voice. He sighed hesitantly. "I'm trying to resolve something from the past, Sarah. Something that's very important to me. I don't think you'd understand." "Michael, you don't have to carry this alone. Whatever you're facing, you can count on me," she replied with a gentle tone that calmed him. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, but he knew he was dealing with something bigger than he could explain. "Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it." The call ended, but her words remained. He knew he had her support, but he also understood that this was a burden he would have to carry to the end, no matter what he found. Finally, after weeks of investigation, Michael managed to piece together a complete picture of the conspiracy. He discovered that his father's former partners had been involved in illicit practices and that his parents were threatening to expose the scheme. To protect their interests, these men had planned what appeared to be a tragic accident, eliminating any opposition. The impact of the discovery was devastating. Michael felt the weight of the truth crushing down on him. He finally understood the pain of everything that had happened, but he also knew that he now had a clear mission: to restore the company's integrity, clear his family's name, and bring justice. "I'm going to expose all of this," he declared to himself, feeling his heart beat with an intensity he hadn't felt for years. The next steps would not be easy. There were risks, he knew that. But when he remembered Juliana's words, "Live your life with love and justice," he felt strengthened. It was more than revenge. It was an act of justice to honor the memory of his parents, to give a dignified end to that story. And so, with the determination and courage he had built up over the years, Michael began his journey of justice. This time, not just for the past, but for all the people around him who deserve an honest and truthful life. The news of what Michael had discovered about the conspiracy involving his parents' death began to circulate in business circles. Although he had acted with caution, it was impossible to keep something of that magnitude completely secret. At the same time, Michael knew that in order to do justice, he would have to be careful and strategic. An abrupt revelation could jeopardize everything, especially if the people involved were still in positions of power. He decided to consult Sarah, who, as well as being his longtime friend, was a lawyer specializing in corporate crime and ethical issues. When he entered her office, she immediately noticed the seriousness on his face. "Michael, something tells me this visit isn't just for coffee," said Sarah with a worried smile. He nodded, taking a deep breath before replying. "Sarah, I need your help. I found out that my parents were victims of a conspiracy within the company. It wasn't an accident. They were murdered." Sarah was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just revealed. "My God, Michael, this is very serious. And you have proof of this?" He nodded, showing her the documents and reports he had gathered. "I have all the proof I need. I've investigated every detail, every suspicious transaction. But I can't do it alone. If these documents are leaked in the wrong way, they could end up being ignored, or worse, used against me." She looked through the papers, leafing through the evidence carefully. "You're right, Michael. We need to have a strategy. This is a delicate battle, and if anyone finds out that we're close to the truth, they might try to stop it at all costs." He approached her, his gaze resolute. "Sarah, I can't let this go. These people need to be held accountable. I want to clear my parents' names and honor their memory." She took a deep breath and nodded, determined. "Very well. I'm with you, Michael. Let's do this the right way." Over the next few days, Michael and Sarah worked in secret. They carefully mapped out each stage of the plan, determining how and when to release the information. Together, they built a detailed dossier, ready to be handed over to the press and the authorities when the time was right. "We have to expose everything at once," Sarah advised. "If only part of the evidence leaks out, they can manipulate the story or even destroy the remaining evidence. It's a dangerous game, but it's the only way to ensure that everyone involved is held accountable." Michael agreed, realizing that, for the first time in years, he felt close to closure. "I trust you, Sarah. I know we're doing the right thing." During one of their meetings, Sarah looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Michael, you know that by doing this, you're putting not only your reputation at risk, but also your safety. These people are powerful and can react unpredictably. My life has already been marked by so much suffering, Sarah. If this is what it takes to finally bring peace to my parents, then I'm prepared to face any consequences." Finally, after weeks of preparation, the day of the revelation arrived. Michael and Sarah organized a press conference. Journalists from all over the country gathered to hear what he had to say. When Michael took to the stage, his heart was beating fast, but his determination was stronger. He began by telling his story, the legacy of his parents, and the tragedy that marked his life. Then he presented the evidence he had gathered, exposing the truth about what had really happened. His words resonated through the room, every detail, every fact making an impact on those present. "My parents were the victims of a cruel conspiracy, a ploy to silence them. Today, I am here to ensure that justice is done. It's not just about honoring my family. It's about holding accountable those who believe they can manipulate lies for their own self-interest." When he finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. The stunned journalists began mumbling and typing frantically, while the cameras recorded Michael's every word. He knew that, from that moment on, his life would never be the same. After the press conference, Michael returned to his office, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. He knew that by exposing the truth about his parents' death, his life would change forever. Now his family's company, the inheritance his parents had built up with so much effort, was in the spotlight and surrounded by suspicion. But Michael had no regrets. He had done what he needed to do to honor their memory and put an end to that tragic story. The next morning, he arrived at the office and found Sarah waiting for him in the meeting room. Her countenance was serious, and Michael realized that something was troubling her. "Sarah," he said, taking a seat next to her, "it looks like it wasn't a good night for you." She sighed, shaking her head. "Michael, since yesterday, I've received countless calls and messages. People try to buy my silence, veiled threats. It seems that by stirring up this story, we've touched something much bigger than we imagined." Michael frowned, feeling a surge of anger and determination. "Do they think they can intimidate us? But they can shut me up after everything they've done? No matter what, Sarah, we're going all the way." Sarah nodded, but the look of concern remained. "We need to be prepared. They'll do everything to discredit you. They'll try to manipulate public opinion. I'm sure they'll use the media to turn this into an attack on your integrity." Michael thought for a moment, remembering Juliana's words about keeping one's heart intact, regardless of adversity. "If that's what they want, they can try. I know who I am, and I know why I'm doing this. If they try to bring me down, they'll find out that I'm not the same fragile boy as before." Over the next few days, Sarah's prediction was confirmed. News began to circulate, but in a distorted way. Headlines suggested that Michael was trying to take revenge on former colleagues, that his actions were motivated by ambition and a desire for control. The media, manipulated by those he had denounced, tried to undermine his credibility and turn his quest for justice into a power struggle. Sitting in his office, Michael watched the newspapers and news sites in frustration. He turned to Sarah, who had entered the room carrying new documents. "They're managing to manipulate everything, just as you predicted. But I'm not going to let them get away with it." Sarah placed the documents on the table and looked at him with a determined expression. "Maybe it's time we used our own strategy, Michael. We need to tell our side of the story directly to the public, without intermediaries." He nodded, already thinking about how he could do this. "What if we did a series of interviews with people who knew my parents? Someone who could vouch for their character, who knew the true story. If public opinion understands who they really were, maybe we can turn this game around." Sarah smiled, impressed by the idea. It's perfect, Michael. And I know some people who would be willing to help. I'll take care of everything." With a plan in place, they began preparing a series of exclusive interviews, revealing details about Michael's parents' character, their achievements, and the values that underpin the company. In each new interview, Michael emphasized the love and dedication they had for their family and the integrity of the business. Little by little, public opinion began to change, and support for Michael grew. During one of these interviews, a reporter asked him directly, "Do you believe that this quest for justice will really make a difference, Michael? Or is it just a way to fill the void of loss?" Michael took a deep breath, taking a moment to choose his words. "It's more than justice for my parents. It's to show everyone that no one is above the truth. If I keep quiet now, I'll be allowing these people to continue manipulating lies without consequences. This isn't about filling a void. It's about preventing others from going through what I went through." His words resonated, and the cameras caught his sincerity. He saw the impact in the reporter's eyes, a rare moment when people seemed to understand the depth of what he was doing. By the end of the interviews, public support was on Michael's side. Those responsible for the conspiracy began to face questions, their stories being dismantled one by one. The pressure was mounting, and the first signs of giving up began to emerge. Some of the men's former allies began to cooperate with the investigation, exposing additional details of the scheme. One day, as Michael was leaving the company building, he was approached by an older man who introduced himself as a former employee of his father's. "Mr. Evans, I worked alongside your father for over 20 years. I kept silent out of fear, but now, seeing your courage, I feel it's time to tell you what I know." Michael watched him carefully, sensing the sincerity in the man's eyes. "I thank you for coming to me. Let's do this together, as it should have been done from the start." With this new testimony, the evidence became even more solid. Those responsible were finally identified, and their network of influence began to unravel. Little by little, the system of protection they had built to hide their crimes was crumbling, exposing what Michael had known all along, the truth. After months of struggle and determination, justice finally prevailed. Those involved were indicted, and his family's company was cleansed of decades of manipulation and corruption. Michael knew he would never recover what he had lost, but at least he could now rest assured that those responsible had been punished and that his parents' memory was finally clean. As he looked out of his office window, he smiled, feeling at peace in his heart. "We did it, Mom, Dad. Now you can rest in peace." With the truth exposed and those responsible for his parents' deaths finally facing justice, Michael felt a sense of relief he had never thought possible. After so long carrying the pain and doubts, he could now look back on his family's legacy with pride and respect. However, this intense journey had left him exhausted, physically and emotionally. To put his mind at rest, Michael decided to take a step back from the business and enjoy some time to himself. Reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized that it was time to reconnect with life outside the walls of the company and the battle for the truth. He felt a new urgency to live intensely, truly, as Juliana had always advised him. One day, while walking through a quiet park in the city, he was surprised by Sarah, who had appeared by surprise. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, smiling. Michael laughed, pleased to see a loyal friend by his side. "You know me too well, Sarah. I think I could really use some peace right now." She nodded, observing the serene surroundings. "After everything you've been through, you deserve it. But tell me, what's next? What are your plans?" Michael sighed, thinking about the possibilities. "I'm not sure. For the first time in a long time, I don't have a fixed plan, but I feel like I want something different, something that brings joy, that's lighter." Sarah watched him intently, as if studying his words. "Maybe it's time to start something new, Michael. Something that's really yours, without the shadows of the past." He thought about it, liking the idea. "You're right, Sarah. Maybe it's time to start again. A new phase, without the chains of the past holding me back." Over the next few days, Michael began to explore new interests and take up small activities that he had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. He attended cultural events, tried out new activities, and even started taking part in charity initiatives, drawing inspiration from the values that Juliana and his parents had always taught him. It was at one of these charity events that he met a woman called Emily, a teacher and volunteer for social causes. As he approached her for a brief chat, he realized that Emily had a special way of talking about the world, as if each word was an invitation to see life in a different way. "You have a very beautiful way of looking at things, Emily," he commented, intrigued by the sincerity and passion she conveyed. She smiled, with a soft gleam in her eyes. "I believe we all have the ability to transform the world around us, Michael. Sometimes all we need is someone to remind us of that." The connection between the two was immediate. Conversations became more frequent, and with each meeting, Michael felt something new being born inside him. Emily was unlike anyone he had ever met. She possessed a lightness and sensitivity that captivated him, and by her side he began to feel more alive, more whole. One quiet evening, as they walked together by a lake, Michael opened his heart, sharing the struggles he had faced to honor his family's legacy and the painful discoveries about his parents' death. He talked about Juliana, about the emptiness he carried, and about the search that had finally brought him the peace he so desperately needed. Emily listened carefully, holding his hand firmly and sympathetically. "Michael, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met, not for exposing the truth, but for finding peace in the midst of it all. Many would have given up, but you found the strength to carry on." He smiled, grateful for her words, feeling that next to her his story was finally complete. "You know, Emily, I think I've found more than I expected on this journey. I found a purpose, and maybe, who knows, someone with whom I can share what's left of this life." She smiled back, squeezing his hand affectionately. "That's life, Michael. It takes us down unexpected paths, but it always gives us the chance to start again. Maybe the love you've been looking for is closer than you think." From that moment on, their relationship blossomed naturally and sincerely. Michael, who had always felt the weight of emptiness in his heart, finally began to feel that that space was being filled with something true and lasting. A while later, next to Emily, Michael reflected on everything he had been through. The search for the truth, the reunion with Juliana, the struggle to honor his parents. Everything had culminated in that moment of peace with someone who truly understood him. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream of a family, of a future where love, joy, and gratitude would be at the center of his life. He knew that the past could never be erased, but he understood now that it was possible to move on without carrying the weight of pain. In Emily, he had found more than a companion. He had found the possibility of a new beginning. Months after starting a relationship with Emily, Michael found himself experiencing a happiness he hadn't thought possible. With her, the days were lighter, and the painful memories seemed to lose the weight they had carried for so long. Emily encouraged him to live in the present and see the small joys that surrounded him, something he had previously found difficult to do. One special evening, while they were having dinner in a cozy restaurant, Michael looked at Emily, who was smiling as she described her last lesson with the students. He realized that he had never felt such a sense of peace and completeness. When she paused to take a sip of wine, he took her hand, looking directly into her eyes. "Emily," he began with a soft smile, "you've changed my life. You brought light to a part of me that had been extinguished for a long time." She smiled, surprised but pleased with his sincerity. "You changed mine too, Michael. With you, I learned the importance of fighting for what's right and the strength that comes from loving those we care about." His heart raced, and without hesitation, he took a deep breath and continued. "I want this journey to continue. I want us to build something together, to have the family I've always dreamed of having." Emily was silent for a moment, moved, and then squeezed his hand affectionately. "I want that too, Michael. I want a life with you, full of love and purpose." The conversation marked a new chapter for them. It wasn't long before they decided to get married, something that, for both of them, symbolized a genuine fresh start, a new chance to build the home they had always wanted. The ceremony was simple, surrounded only by close friends and a few people from Emily's family. Michael felt that, on that day, he was leaving behind the weight of the past and embracing a future of love and renewal. Sarah was there, by his side, smiling with pride and unconditional support. At the end of the ceremony, she hugged him and said with emotion, "I never imagined that one day you would get this far, Michael. You deserve all this happiness." He smiled, grateful for her friendship. "Thank you, Sarah. If it hadn't been for you, I might never have found the strength to face everything." The first few months of their marriage were full of discoveries. Michael and Emily learned to share the good days and the difficult ones, and with each challenge, their bond grew stronger. For Michael, the feeling of finally having a family, of feeling complete with someone who understood him, was indescribable. One evening, while they were watching a movie together on the sofa at home, Emily looked at Michael, hesitantly, but with a special sparkle in her eyes. "I have some news to tell you," she said, smiling shyly. Michael frowned, curious. "What is it? You're making me anxious." She took a deep breath, held his hand and said, thrilled, "We're expecting a baby, Michael." For a moment, he was in shock, her words echoing in his mind. "A baby? We're having a baby?" he repeated with a smile slowly emerging. She nodded, tears of joy in her eyes. "Yes, we're going to have a family, Michael." He hugged her tightly, feeling an indescribable emotion. That moment symbolized everything he had been searching for over the years. The possibility of building a family full of love, something he had never fully had, but which he could now provide for his own child. During the months of pregnancy, Michael followed every detail, delighted and involved. He read up on fatherhood, accompanied Emily to every appointment, and took part in all the preparations for the baby's arrival. For him, this was not just the expectation of being a father, but the realization of a dream, a promise he had made to himself, and which was now about to come true. One evening, while they were preparing the baby's room, Michael stopped to watch Emily, who was adjusting a small mobile above the crib. He approached her and hugged her from behind, whispering in her ear, "I promise I'll be the best father I can be, Emily. I want our son to grow up surrounded by love and know that we'll always be here for him." She smiled and turned to face him. "I have no doubt about that, Michael. You have a huge heart, and our son will have the best example of love and resilience." The birth of the baby was a moment of pure emotion and joy. When Michael held his son in his arms for the first time, he felt a deep peace, as if he was finally complete. He looked into the baby's delicate face and whispered with emotion, "Welcome to the world, my little one. I will protect you and love you with everything I am." From that moment on, Michael knew that his life had a new meaning. He would leave behind the pain and struggles he had faced, using everything he had learned to build a home where love, respect, and dedication were the foundation. With Emily and his son, he finally felt at peace. And as he looked to the future, Michael knew that the past would always leave marks. But now, they were just memories from a journey that had finally brought him where he had always longed to be. Home, with the family he had dreamed of. The first years as a father were intense and transformative for Michael. He devoted himself to every moment, with a love and commitment he had never imagined he would have. That little being depended on him, and Emily filled his life in a new way, giving him the opportunity to experience the kind of family connection he had always wanted. For him, every laugh, every achievement by his son was a reminder that he had finally found what he had been looking for. One day, while sitting on the sofa with his son, who was now about 2 years old and loved listening to stories, Michael realized something. He had spent a good part of his life seeking justice for the past, and now, with his new family, he understood that he no longer had to let it hold him back. He could look at life with lightness and gratitude. Emily, always by his side, had helped light his path. One evening, after putting his son to bed, Michael sat with Emily on the balcony. The night was calm, and the fresh air brought a sense of peace. He looked at her, holding her hand. "Emily, I don't think I've ever thanked you for everything you've done for me. You've given me a family, a reason to go on. You've made me see that happiness is possible." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Michael, you don't have to thank me. All I've done is be by your side and believe in the love we share. You deserve this peace. You deserve to be happy." He took a deep breath, plucking up the courage to share a thought he'd been harboring for some time. "You know, I spent years carrying my parents' story, seeking justice, trying to prove something to the world. But today, I realize that all that is in the past. For the first time, I feel like I can put it behind me and just focus on the present, on our family. Emily looked at him fondly. That's wonderful, Michael. It means you've finally found peace. The past was painful, but it brought you here, and now you have the chance to build something that is yours alone. In the months that followed, Michael immersed himself even more in his new family life, and that feeling of freedom grew. He and Emily began to make plans for the future, talking about how they wanted to raise their son, the trips they dreamed of taking, and the life projects they both wanted to accomplish. The house, once just a physical space, became a home in which he felt a security he had never known before. One weekend, they decided to take a trip to the countryside, just the three of them, away from routine and the city. The peaceful environment, surrounded by nature, was the perfect setting for the new life they were building. During a walk in the countryside, with his son on his shoulders, Michael stopped and observed the view around them. He felt he was living one of the happiest moments of his life. Emily, noticing Michael's distant gaze, approached and touched his arm. "Are you all right?" He smiled, thrilled. "Yes, it's more than okay. For so long, I thought I would never find peace. And now, here with you, I feel like everything makes sense. You are my world." She smiled and hugged him, and her son, curious, stretched out his arms to his parents. That image of love and unity was all he had ever wanted. At that moment, Michael knew that the promise he had made to himself had been fulfilled. He had created the family he had dreamed of and had always sought on his journey. When they returned home from their trip, Michael decided it was time to take a new step. He wanted to share with the world what he had learned on his journey, not the pain and revenge part, but the importance of love, forgiveness, and inner peace. He thought about writing a book, something that could inspire other people who, like him, carried wounds from the past. "Emily," he said one evening as they discussed their plans, "I want to tell my story, not the dark details, but the lessons I've learned. I think it might help people see that it's possible to find happiness, even after everything." She smiled, supporting the idea immediately. "I think it would be wonderful, Michael. Your story is one of resilience and overcoming. And if it can help someone find their own peace, then it will have been worth it." And so Michael began to write. Every morning, he dedicated himself to putting down on paper his memories, his learnings, and the process that had taken him from a painful childhood to building a fulfilling life. He wrote with sincerity, talking about the importance of forgiveness, leaving the past behind and focusing on what really mattered, the love that now filled his life. When he finished the manuscript, he felt that, in a way, he was bringing a phase of his life to a close. The book wasn't just a story, it was a farewell to the past and a tribute to the future he was now building with Emily and their son. When he handed the book over to the publisher, he felt relieved, as if he was letting go of the last bit of that pain. Months later, when the book was released, Michael and Emily were surprised by the repercussions. People from all over were sending letters and messages, thanking him for sharing his journey and giving hope to those facing their own battles. Michael realized that by telling his story, he was creating an invisible support network, connecting with people he might never have met, but who understood and valued his message. One evening, while reading one of these letters, Emily came up to him and hugged him. "You've done something beautiful, Michael. By sharing your story, you've helped other people find strength and hope." He smiled, touched. "All of this was only possible because I found peace with you, Emily. You and our son are my true home." And there, with his family by his side and the certainty that he was living a full life, Michael finally felt that there were no more ghosts of the past to face. He had won something more valuable than any justice or revenge: inner peace and the love of a real family. With the release of the book and the positive impact it made, Michael began to be invited to talks and events where he shared his story of overcoming and resilience. He talked about the importance of moving on, forgiving, and above all, building a home based on love. Emily always accompanied him, and her presence at his side was a clear symbol of how much he had achieved in emotional and family terms. At one of these talks, after telling how he had gone from a childhood marked by loss to the full life he now led, someone in the audience raised their hand. It was a young man who seemed deeply moved by Michael's story. "Michael," he began hesitantly, "how did you manage to forgive the people who took everything from you?" I find it hard to let go of the past, to forget what they did to me. How did you get over it?" Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question, which brought back old memories. He looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly, and then turned her attention to the young man. "I'm not going to lie to you," Michael replied, with a sincerity that captivated everyone in the auditorium. "For a long time, my life was driven by a desire for justice, and perhaps even revenge. I thought that by punishing those responsible, I would find peace. But the truth is that when I finally revealed the truth, I realized that I still felt incomplete." The young man listened attentively, and Michael continued, choosing his words carefully. "It was only when I met my wife and built my own family that I understood the true power of forgiveness. I realized that by forgiving, I wasn't absolving anyone of responsibility, but freeing myself. I realized that in order to move on, I needed to leave the weight of that anger in the past." He paused, letting his words resonate. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it transforms the way we feel about what happened. Today, I can look back on my story with gratitude because without that pain, I might never have built the life I have now. The answer deeply touched not only the young man, but the entire audience. The talk ended with a long round of applause, and Michael felt that he was fulfilling an even greater purpose than he had imagined, helping other people to find peace with their own pain. After the event, as they walked to the car, Emily held his hand and smiled. "You know, Michael, you're helping more people than you realize. Your story is a reminder that pain can be transformed into something beautiful." He smiled back gratefully. "You've always been my source of peace, Emily. Everything we've built together has shown me that love is stronger than any hurt." At home, as they put their son to sleep, Michael felt overwhelmed by a deep sense of peace. The journey that had taken him there had not been easy, but alongside Emily and his family, he now understood that he had the power to turn his story into a message of hope. At the end of that night, as they watched their son sleep peacefully, Michael looked at Emily and whispered, "I never imagined that life could be so complete. It's like all the pieces are finally in place." She hugged him and replied, as calmly as ever, "You found what you've always been looking for, Michael. You found the home you always deserved." And so, with a full heart, Michael knew that no matter what the future brought, he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by love, peace, and a family that represented everything he had always been looking for. After the release of his book and the growing impact his story had on people, Michael began to receive invitations from various media to share his story. But it was one proposal in particular that surprised him. One of the country's largest newspapers wanted to do a full report on his life, a story that would cover everything from his childhood traumas to his journey of overcoming them, discovering the truth about his parents, and finding love and peace with his new family. Emily was delighted with the idea and encouraged Michael to accept. "Your story deserves to be told in every possible way, Michael. It's a message that can help so many people who, like you, are looking for a way out of the pain of the past." He agreed, with a slight smile, feeling grateful to have found in Emily a companion who was always there for him. "If my story can touch someone's heart, then it's definitely worth telling." On the morning of the interview, the production team arrived at their house with cameras, recording equipment, and a support team. The movement was intense, but Emily, always serene, helped everyone settle in and ensured that Michael felt comfortable. While they waited for the reporter to finish getting ready, Emily noticed that he seemed a little nervous. She approached him, holding his hand. "Is everything all right, love?" He sighed, holding her hand tightly. "I just get a bit apprehensive about talking about everything again. It's like I'm revisiting parts of myself that I've finally learned to leave in the past." She nodded, understanding. "I understand, but remember that you don't have to force yourself into anything. Just say what your heart allows. Everyone here has come to hear your truth, and that's what matters." Michael smiled, reassured by Emily's words. He knew that by her side, he could face any challenge, even the most difficult ones in his own soul. And so, with a lighter heart, He prepared himself for the moment. The reporter, Jack, approached with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Michael, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for having us and for sharing your story with us." Michael nodded, returning the smile. "I appreciate the opportunity, Jack. I hope we can do something meaningful today." After a few technical adjustments, the interview began. Jack began with lighter questions, asking about Michael's childhood and what it was like growing up in such a successful family. Michael answered calmly, but his tone was laden with nostalgia and a certain sadness. He explained how his parents were busy and distant, and how Juliana, his nanny, had been the true figure of love and care in his life. "Juliana was my anchor," he said in a slightly embarrassed voice. "She taught me the importance of affection and kindness. And when I had to face the world alone after losing my parents, it was her memory that gave me the strength to go on." Jack took the opportunity to ask him about the impact of the tragedy on his life and how he dealt with the pain of such an early loss. Michael took a deep breath before answering, feeling the weight of the memories return. "For a long time, I only knew how to live with the pain. It was as if a part of me had been ripped away and nothing could fill that void. I lived with that feeling for years and tried to fill it with achievements, work, success. But there was always a gap that nothing seemed to fill." He went on to describe the determination he felt when he discovered that his parents' death was not accidental, but the result of a conspiracy. He explained how this motivated him to seek justice, even though he knew that this journey could cost him everything. "It was like a mission that I needed to complete, not only to honor my parents' memory, but to restore the truth. I thought that by exposing everything, I would finally find peace. But deep down, even when I got justice, I still didn't feel complete. Something was missing." Jack, with a watchful eye, asked him what he thought was missing at that moment, and how he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. Michael smiled and looked at Emily, who was watching him with unwavering affection. "What was missing was that," he said, pointing at her. "What was missing was someone to share my life with. I lived for so long trying to prove something to the world. But it wasn't until I met Emily and we built our family that I understood that what I was really looking for wasn't justice. It was love. It was a real family." Jack, touched by the answer, paused before continuing. "That's very powerful, Michael. But what about forgiveness? Was that something you were able to offer to those who caused you so much pain?" Michael was silent for a moment, as if measuring his words. "Forgiveness was the hardest step," he admitted. "It wasn't something I achieved overnight. It was a long process, and I needed help from people around me, especially Emily. Over time, I understood that forgiveness wasn't about relieving their guilt, but about freeing myself. I needed to leave that hatred behind because it was what kept me stuck in the past." Jack nodded, impressed by Michael's emotional maturity. "And do you feel at peace now?" Michael smiled with a twinkle in his eye. "Yes, Jack, I'm finally at peace. I realize that everything I've lived through, even the deepest pains, have brought me here. And today, next to Emily and our son, I can say that I have everything I ever wanted." The interview continued for some time, with Michael sharing details about how he and Emily built a home of love and respect, teaching their son about the importance of compassion and empathy. He mentioned how rewarding it was to see his story reach so many people and inspire them to find their own peace. At the end, Jack shook Michael's hand with an air of deep respect. "Michael, your story is a true inspiration. I'm sure it will touch the hearts of many people. Thank you for sharing it with us." When the team had said their goodbyes and silence reigned in the house, Michael and Emily went out into the garden, watching the sky, which was now tinged with the orange of sunset. Michael sighed, feeling a relief he hadn't experienced for a long time. "It was hard, but I think I needed to share it all," he said with a serene smile. Emily hugged him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You did something very important today, Michael. Your story is not just about you, but about everyone who is looking for a reason to go on and to leave the past in the past." He wrapped her in a hug, feeling the warmth and love that always welcomed him. "And it was you who taught me that, Emily. Without you, I might never have found the peace I've always sought." She smiled and looked him in the eye with the same intensity as when they first met. It wasn't just me, Michael. It was you who decided to turn pain into something beautiful. It's you who has that strength within you." As night fell and the stars began to appear, Michael felt complete. He knew that from now on, his life would be dedicated to giving back to the world what he had learned from his own journey. He wanted his every step, alongside Emily and his family, to be a celebration of love, forgiveness, and overcoming. And deep down, he knew that he had finally found what he had always been looking for: a real home, built with the peace that came from within and the love of those around him. Months after the major report that had told Michael's story to the country, he and Emily began to notice that the narrative of his life, shared with such sincerity, resonated deeply with thousands of people. Letters, emails, and messages poured in from all over, thanking him for being so open about his journey of pain, redemption, and love. The impact was greater than they could ever have imagined. Michael felt that, for the first time, his life had a purpose that went beyond any material achievement. One night, while putting his son to bed, Michael found a small folded letter among his things, probably left by Emily's grandmother, who had visited earlier. It was a handwritten text, brief, but with words that seemed to cross time and space. She had written, "Michael, life is brief, but the love we leave behind can last forever. May you always remember everything you have faced, not as a scar, but as proof of your strength. Turn that strength into something that inspires others to find their own peace." With his heart touched by the message, Michael read the words once more, feeling that Emily's grandmother's wisdom was giving him direction. He put the letter away in his pocket, and when he went downstairs to find Emily in the living room, he was looking serene and reflective. Emily noticed immediately and asked with a smile, "What's up, love? You seem distant." Michael approached her, holding the letter in his hands, and handed it over. "Your grandmother left this for me. She seems to know exactly what to say, even when I didn't even know I needed to hear it." Emily read the letter and smiled. "She was always wise. And she's right, Michael. You have a rare power, a story that is already changing the lives of so many people. Perhaps this is a new stage for you, to turn that story into something bigger." Michael pondered her words. He had been feeling for some time that his life had the potential for something even more significant, something that could help people overcome their own pain. What if I set up a foundation, something that could support people who have been through trauma, who carry pain and don't know how to move on? Emily looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes, excited by the idea. "It would be incredible, Michael. Imagine how many people could be inspired and find support. You know what it's like to live with a void, and you know what it's like to fill that void with love. It could be exactly what many people need." And that's how the project that Michael called the Fresh Start Foundation was born. The foundation would aim to support people dealing with loss, trauma, and emotional difficulties, offering psychological, financial, and social support to those wishing to rebuild their lives. Michael knew he couldn't turn back time or erase anyone's pain, but he believed he could offer an opportunity for a new beginning, just as he himself had found. The months that followed were intense. Michael and Emily dedicated themselves to structuring the foundation, involving professionals from different fields who shared the same vision. Psychologists, social workers, therapists, and volunteers joined the project, all willing to help those who needed support to start over. At one of the foundation's first meetings, Michael made a point of speaking personally to the volunteers and collaborators. In his calm, determined voice, he shared what he expected from the initiative. "I know we can't change what people have lived through," he began, looking at everyone in the room, "but I believe we can offer a path back to peace. For me, overcoming came with love and with the help of people who stood by my side. And that's what I want this foundation to be for those looking for a new start, a place of support and love." Those present applauded his words, moved by Michael's sincerity and passion. There, he knew he was creating something that would go far beyond his own story, something that would continue to impact lives even when he was no longer there. Over the next few weeks, the foundation began to receive its first cases. A woman who had lost her husband in an accident, a young man struggling with depression after the death of his parents, a war veteran trying to cope with the trauma of battle. Michael and Emily made a point of following each story closely, offering everyone a warm welcome and a safe space to share their pain. In one of these meetings, a young woman called Lisa, who had lost her mother to cancer, approached Michael, shy but full of courage. "Do you really think I'll ever get over this pain?" she asked, her eyes watering. Michael looked her in the eye, remembering the child he had once been, carrying his own emptiness. "Lisa, I don't know if the pain will ever go away, but I can assure you that one day it will. The love you feel for your mother is still with you, and that's what will help you move on. It's not about forgetting the pain, it's about learning to live with it in a way that doesn't hold you back." She smiled shyly, taking his hand. "Thank you. I think that's the first time I've heard that from someone who really understands." Michael felt his heart warm. Each of those conversations, each person he and Emily met along the way was proof that they had chosen the right path. The foundation was becoming a bridge for others to find what he had found with his family: peace, love, and the chance to start again. That evening, on their way home, he and Emily sat in the garden under the starry sky. She snuggled up next to him in silence, and he felt a deep gratitude for having her in his life as a pillar that supported every step of his journey. "You know that none of this would have been possible without you, don't you?" he murmured, looking at her lovingly. Emily smiled, taking his hand. "I only helped you find what was already there, Michael. All of it. The foundation, the love, the peace, has always been in you. I just stood by your side to watch it all blossom." They hugged, feeling that they were finally fulfilling a purpose that transcended any pain or difficulty they had experienced. The Fresh Start Foundation wasn't just a project. It was a legacy, a reflection of everything Michael had learned and transformed throughout his life. And as they looked up at the sky, filled with stars, they both knew that they were only at the beginning of a new journey. A journey where, together, they could continue to illuminate the lives of others, offering everyone the opportunity to start again, just as he himself had once done. The impact of the Fresh Start Foundation grew every month, and Michael and Emily couldn't be happier. With each new person who found support, a new purpose filled their lives, giving meaning to everything they had been through. Stories of transformation and hope emerged from every corner, and each one was a reminder that, despite all the pain they had faced, something beautiful was being built. A year after the foundation's official launch, Michael and Emily decided to organize a big celebration and thank you event, a time to bring together everyone who had contributed to the foundation's success. The event would also be an opportunity for those who had been helped to tell their stories, showing the world the power of starting over. The evening arrived, and the auditorium was packed. Michael, standing on the stage, looked out at the crowd with a mixture of humility and pride. Accompanied by Emily, he began his opening speech, his voice firm and serene. "Good evening, everyone," he said, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Tonight is a special night. We are here to celebrate life, new beginnings, and the strength of each person who has found the courage to move forward, regardless of adversity." He paused, looking at the emotional faces in the audience. The Fresh Start Foundation was born out of deep pain, a search for justice and peace. But above all, it was born out of a desire to transform pain into something greater, into something that could help other people find what I found with the support of my family and my wife, Emily. Michael held out his hand to Emily, who was standing next to him on stage, and she took it, smiling with pride and love. Emily was my support, my strength, and today she's the force behind this foundation. Without her, none of this would be possible. The audience applauded, and Emily smiled, touched. Then Michael continued, "I'd like to invite a few people to share their stories with us, so that everyone can see how hope can be born even in the most difficult times." The first person to take the stage was Lisa, the young woman who had lost her mother and had found support in the foundation. With a shaky voice, she began to tell her story, but soon found confidence as she looked at Michael and Emily. "I thought I would never get over the loss of my mother," she said, wiping away a tear. "But the Fresh Start Foundation gave me more than support. It gave me the chance to rebuild my life, to realize that pain didn't have to be the end." She looked at Michael, her eyes shining with gratitude. I can never thank you enough. Today, I feel strong because I found a family who took me in my worst moments." Michael smiled, feeling a deep emotion at her words. That young woman who a year ago was lost in pain, now shone with a strength that he knew had been gained through her own overcoming. Other people also shared their stories, each one more moving than the last. There was a war veteran who, thanks to the foundation, had managed to find inner peace again. A mother who, after losing a child, had found emotional support in the foundation to move on. A young man who had overcome depression after his brother's suicide and was now working as a volunteer, helping others going through difficult times. With each story told, the audience became more emotional, and Michael and Emily felt that they were fulfilling a purpose that went far beyond what they had once dreamed of. When all the stories had been told, Michael returned to center stage, feeling more inspired than ever. Hearing these stories reminds us that, even in the deepest darkness, there is always a light. Each and every one of you is that light, he said, his voice breaking. The Fresh Start Foundation is not just an institution. It's a family. And as a family, we are here to support each other, to grow together, and to transform the world into a place where everyone can have the chance to start again. He paused and looked at Emily. Today, we want to announce that the foundation will be expanding its activities to reach even more people. We will be opening new support centers and offering more resources to ensure that everyone who needs help can find it. The audience applauded intensely, and Michael felt the vibrant energy of each person present, a deep connection that transcended words. He knew that this expansion was not just a dream, but a mission he was willing to fight for. At the end of the event, while the guests chatted, exchanged hugs, and expressed gratitude, Michael and Emily walked around the auditorium, listening to the stories and receiving people's affection. Many wanted to thank them personally, to tell them how the foundation had transformed their lives. Michael realized that this was one of the most rewarding moments of his life. Later, when the event ended and the lights went out, Michael and Emily stood on the empty stage, absorbing the energy of that unforgettable day. He looked at her, holding her hands, and whispered, his voice tinged with emotion. "Emily, I never imagined we'd come this far. Seeing these people, hearing what the foundation has done for them, it's the greatest achievement of my life." She hugged him, smiling tenderly. "You turned your pain into something the world needed, Michael. And that's one of the most beautiful things anyone can do." He held her tenderly, feeling a deep peace, as if, at last, his soul was completely at peace. "It was you who taught me to see beyond the pain, Emily. You were my guide, my strength. All I wanted was to give back to the world the love you brought into my life." She kissed him softly and said, "And you did that? Together, we've created something that will live on beyond us, something that will continue to help people find the peace and love that you found." Michael looked at her, feeling grateful for every moment, for every obstacle overcome, for every pain transformed into hope. He knew their journey was just beginning, but with Emily by his side and the foundation as a legacy of love and redemption, he was prepared for whatever the future brought. And so, as the stars shone in the sky that unforgettable night, Michael and Emily vowed to continue expanding the mission of the Fresh Start Foundation, bringing light to those still walking in darkness, inspiring them to start again and showing that, in the midst of pain, there is always the possibility of finding a new beginning. With the growing success of the Fresh Start Foundation, Michael and Emily were at a turning point. The new support centers were full of people looking for help, and the demand for assistance was only increasing. The foundation's impact was greater than they had ever imagined, but growth brought new challenges. With limited resources and the need to expand, Michael began to receive proposals from large companies and investors interested in funding the foundation. However, he knew that not all the interested parties shared the same vision and values that he and Emily considered fundamental. One evening, after a meeting with the management team, Michael and Emily sat in the foundation's office, reflecting on the decisions they would need to make. Emily, as always, was the first to pick up on Michael's concern. "I can see how these proposals bother you, Michael. What's really weighing on you?" she asked, watching him intently. He sighed, looking at the papers containing the investment offers. I want to expand the foundation. Emily, I want more people to have access to the support we offer here. But accepting these investments could mean giving in to interests that don't have the same commitment as us. I fear that the essence of the foundation, what has made it so special, will be lost. Emily took his hand, conveying her support. I understand how you feel, but perhaps there is a way to expand without compromising our values. Maybe we can take the foundation to places that don't require a physical presence, but where we can still reach people. What do you think of a digital platform? Michael was silent for a moment, considering the idea. A platform? You mean something online, where people can access it from anywhere? She nodded enthusiastically. Think about it. We could create a virtual space where people can find emotional support, attend lectures, talk to professionals. This would democratize access, especially for those living in remote areas. And best of all, we could do it our way, with our own team. Michael smiled, feeling invigorated by the idea. That's brilliant, Emily. We can expand in a way that maintains our independence. And it's something that can really reach millions, especially those who don't have easy access to support centers. Over the next few days, they brought together the Foundation's team of experts to discuss the new idea. Psychologists, therapists, social workers, and technology experts began work on creating a digital platform that would take the Fresh Start Foundation's mission to a whole new level. During one of the meetings, Sarah, one of the Foundation psychologists, raised an important issue. I believe we need to ensure that this platform is more than just a website. We need to create a welcoming and safe environment where people really feel supported, like here in the physical centers. Emily smiled, admiring Sarah's dedication. I totally agree. We want every person who accesses the platform to feel the warmth and welcome of the Foundation. We can include support videos, interactive guidance, and even chat groups with moderators. Michael, excited by the progress, suggested something that he believed would make all the difference. What if we also had specific support groups, each one focused on a particular need? Loss, overcoming trauma, family reconstruction. People will be able to find a group that understands exactly what they're going through. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and the team soon began to work out the details. Before long, the platform took shape. Named Fresh Start Online, it offered a range of resources. Video conferences with professionals, moderated support groups, recorded talks by Michael and other experts, and even a library of emotional guidance texts and videos. At the launch of the platform, Michael and Emily decided to do a live broadcast, explaining the importance of the project and inviting people from all over the country to get to know the virtual space they had created. On the night of the launch, while they were fine-tuning the last details, Michael felt a mixture of nervousness and gratitude. "Do you think we're ready?" he asked Emily, adjusting the microphone before joining the broadcast. She smiled, taking his hand. "Yes, Michael, we're more than ready. And do you know why? Because we're doing it for the people. No matter how much we grow, our mission remains the same." The broadcast began, and Michael, with Emily by his side, spoke directly to the thousands of people watching from their homes. "Good evening, everyone. Today is a special day for the Fresh Start Foundation. When we began this journey, our desire was to transform pain into a new opportunity for life. Over the years, we have witnessed stories of overcoming, love, and new beginnings. And we've realized that in order to help more people, we need to adapt to the world we live in." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "That's why we're launching Fresh Start Online. From now on, anyone, anywhere, will be able to access our platform and find the support they need. We want everyone to have the chance to start again. And this platform is a way of saying that we are with you, no matter where you are." Comments quickly started appearing on the broadcast. People thanking them, saying that they had been waiting for something like this for years, praising Michael and Emily's courage in expanding the foundation without losing sight of its original purpose. They read some of these comments live, moved by the immediate impact. After the launch, the response was extraordinary. Within days, thousands of people had registered on the platform, participating in the support groups and attending the talks. The foundation became more accessible than ever, and Michael and Emily realized they had taken the right step. That evening, after the successful launch, they returned home, exhausted but lighthearted. Sitting in the living room, Emily looked at Michael with a smile of pure satisfaction. "I knew this would be special, but seeing how well the platform has been received has exceeded all my expectations," she said with a twinkle in her eye. Michael hugged her, feeling complete. And to think it all started with a personal quest for justice and peace. "Look what we've managed to build together, Emily. It's as if we've given life to something much bigger than ourselves." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "And that's exactly it, Michael. That's our legacy, something that can really make a difference in the world." As they looked out of the window, the night sky seemed endless, like the possibilities they had created with the foundation and the new platform. They knew they were just getting started and that over time, Fresh Start Online would become a source of support and inspiration for thousands, perhaps millions of people, showing that fresh starts were possible for everyone. And so, together, Michael and Emily continued with the mission they had embraced wholeheartedly, aware that by transforming their own lives, they had planted the seeds for other lives to flourish too. If you enjoyed this video, comment your age and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like to see more content like this, we prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch